Welcome to Entre News, a production of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship.
Welcome to Entre News, the podcast from the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, NFTE, where we explore big ideas shaping the future of education, innovation, and the entrepreneurial mindset. I'm your host, Dr. LaRock, President and CEO of NFTE, and today's guest is someone I've had the pleasure of knowing in multiple capacities as a doctoral student, as a colleague, and also as a true leader in the innovation space. Dr. Ande Noktes is founding director of the Lucas Center for Entrepreneurship and a strategic consultant with NFTE, where she's helping us reimagine enterprise education for the next generation. Ande, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, JD.
You've had a really fascinating career. Walk our viewers and listeners through all that you've done around entrepreneurship and innovation and education over the years.
I started my first business about 20 years ago. I had $9 in my bank account and a $100 gift card to my name, and three kids under the age of two, twins in there, if you're doing the math on that. And I looked around the world of education and I thought, this is so broken. We know so much about what the human mind needs to learn, and those things aren't happening in our classrooms. And I couldn't imagine a world where I didn't take my meager resources and really limited time and figure out how to start my first school. Fast forward about 15 years, I ended up starting three schools and all still going strong in the Atlanta metro area, and decided that the next phase of my journey was to support other problem solvers like me who wanted to solve the challenges that they saw in their communities and worlds through entrepreneurship. And so I started doing consulting and coaching and eventually decided it was time to open an entrepreneurship center. And luckily, the timing worked out where Lucas, who is an entrepreneur in his own right, gave a gift to the foundation to launch an entrepreneurship center here on the coast of Georgia. That's what I've been doing over the last couple of years, is building the entrepreneurial spirit and helping dreams come true here on the coast.
Amazing. And of course, as entrepreneurs and educators at NFTE, we can well appreciate your journey. Although I have to say, when I became CEO of NFTE, I had more than $9 in my pocket, and I commend you on that. Now, we'll get back to that, but we had the privilege of working with each other on your doctoral research, and it's
Yes.
worth mentioning because it's highly relevant to the topic we're talking about, but also salient issues in today's society. So, talk a little bit about your study.
Absolutely. So I was really curious about women entrepreneurs' access to capital. As you can imagine from my own story, that was a really relevant topic to me. And it seemed to me that just from my own experiences and the experiences I had working with women entrepreneurs, that there were challenges and roadblocks in accessing capital. That was all anecdotal. And so I really wanted to learn what those challenges were, particularly in the small bank lending space. And so my research studied small bank lending and access for women entrepreneurs, particularly around the perceptions that lending officers at small community banks have about women entrepreneurs.
And what were your key findings?
I found some really interesting across genders of lending officers, across regions, whether the lending officer was from a small rural community or from a major metropolitan area. Some really consistent findings around what I called the masculinization of entrepreneurship. So all of the examples that I heard throughout the study from the lending officers as we went through our discussions were of male entrepreneurs, even though about 45% of entrepreneurs in American society today are women. About 45% of women entrepreneurs have access to less than 4% of all available capital. What I uncovered was this idea that we have this perception of what it means to be an entrepreneur. And if we don't fit into that mold, that can be perceived as risky by a lending officer whose job it is to keep the bank safe from risk, from risky loans. So, really starting to kind of unpack why that is and how regulation, education, and cultural shifts could make a change on that front.
And what are some of your thoughts about what could be changed on the regulatory or educational or cultural front to address this situation?
I think on the regulatory side, to start there, because lending officers are paid to ensure that their bank isn't taking on more risk that it can handle. If a lending officer or a bank takes on a loan that's risky, then they have to have more capital in the bank to offset that risk. And that's just the way that regulation works today. And it makes sense because we want our financial institutions to stay safe and to protect the funds that we put into them. The challenge is that perception can kind of trump reality in the sense that if I have a perception of what it means to be an entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur, and I then see someone who is outside of that mold, I might believe that to be a riskier investment, even if on paper it's not necessarily a riskier investment. And there are some strategies that we could put in place from a regulatory perspective to ensure that those perceptions aren't getting institutionalized into the lending process. So, some of the pre screening that happens in banks, for example, to weed out applicants, because lending, of course, is also an expensive endeavor that banks take on. Some of that pre-screening, having more formalized processes and training around that could be one step in the right direction. Educational, I think entrepreneurship education is critical here, because one thing I heard over and over again in my research and that I see every day is when entrepreneurs go to access capital and they're prepared, knowing how to be prepared, knowing how to ask questions, knowing what their rights are and what kind of information they have to the opportunity to ask for from the bank are really important. That educational component is really important. And then, also entrepreneurs knowing that they can always invite the banker to their place of business to see operations and kind of humanize the process. And then from a cultural perspective, one of the findings I had was that lending officers who demonstrated an externalized locus of control. That means that they kind of say the person who's responsible for the outcome of this situation is not me. It's someone else or something else outside of me. Those lending officers that had that externalized locus of control were also more likely to use more masculinization of entrepreneurship. And so that was an interesting phenomenon where those that had more of an internal locus of control, saying, like, I have decision making authority here, I can control the outcome of this process that I go through with an entrepreneur, they were more likely to demonstrate more supportive types of attitudes and to have more diverse perspectives related to lending. So I think from a cultural perspective, the more we can shift our values to having an internal locus of control, the sense of agency that I'm in control of my world and the consequences of it and the outcomes, I think that we can see some really tremendous shifts, not just in lending for women entrepreneurs, but more broadly too.
Really interesting findings from your study and highly relevant to the work that we do at Nifty, as you know, because among other things, one of our points of pride at Nifty is that we are empowering young women as well as young men to be involved as young entrepreneurs and to develop their capabilities. As a matter of fact, in studies of our own entrepreneurial mindset index, the results defy typical stereotypes. There is this unproven assertion oftentimes that young women are less interested in entrepreneurship, might not be as good at entrepreneurship. But when we actually measure that through the assessments that we have, we find that young women start off in a stronger place than boys in general and actually make further progress on almost all of the indicators that we use at Nifty to measure the entrepreneurial mindset. So the fact that your research calls to mind and proposes some straightforward steps to address this disjuncture is really, really important. Let's talk about what you are doing with Nifty and the work of Nifty in general. So, your thesis was about access to capital. You've done a lot of work around that. Of course, a parallel is access to opportunity. That's what NFTE is all about, bringing the power of entrepreneurship education to communities that don't typically get that kind of education. In your view, how can we better prepare underrepresented systems to enter ecosystems that weren't built with them in mind?
Oh, this is also a big question. One is going back to the mindset question that you talked about first. The idea that in entrepreneurship, it really does all begin with you and the mindset that you bring into the work. Are you solution oriented? Do you have a strong sense of agency? Are you capable and eager to see and jump on opportunities as they're presented to you? Some of those mindset characteristics, I think, are really critical foundation for this work. So, kind of taking the institution out of it for a moment and focusing on the individual. I think communities that may not have had access to entrepreneurship education previously, when presented with this entrepreneurial mindset work as the foundation of the entrepreneurial journey, it allows us to really see the world in different ways. I had a student go through one of my programs that we run here at the Lucas Center for Entrepreneurship, and he said exactly this after the mindset section. He's like, I feel like I see the world in a completely different way now. And he became a serial entrepreneur after that boot camp that he attended. And I think that mindset of I can control the destiny, the outcomes that are in front of me. I have options and I can choose them. It's a mindset shift for sure, but it's also a really important piece of starting to fix those institutions. And then from the institutional perspective and thinking about the institutions not being built for everyone, starting to understand where that externalized locus of control shows up, because part of the findings of my research was that when there are these externalized loci of control and a perception that only certain people who look a certain way should be entrepreneurs, then we start to embed that persona throughout the institutions. Whereas when we are able to take ownership of the decisions that we make, each as a part of the institution, whether we're engaging with it from the outside as an entrepreneur or we're working within it, as we take ownership, we can start to break down some of those implicit biases that are institutionalized.
This is such a interesting time to consider questions of what the shape of education could be or should be. Because as you know, we're in a period in our country where there's a lot of questioning of education as it currently stands. Some of that is political, some of that has to do with the content and the subject matter. Some of it has to do with the format in which education is delivered. And all of these things are very much in play right now. At NFTE, you're helping us launch an AI powered online entrepreneurship program for homeschool and micro school learners, two populations that are very much on the ascendancy right now in US education. Talk to us a little bit about what you have learned about those communities, what you think about the use cases of AI in education, and what does education innovation look like today given these ways in which education funding and education delivery systems are clearly shifting in real time.
You know, my biggest trigger is a justice trigger when I see that there's a potential that exists in a human being and that person doesn't have access to opportunities or tools to be able to reach that potential, or if there are intentionally roadblocks put up for individuals. And I think the work that I know that's really high level, but the work that we've been doing on the homeschool front and leveraging AI, it starts to break down those barriers for learners, because why should students need to wait to learn? Right? We know with AI, we have the opportunity to figure out where each student is and ensure that they are learning and growing and moving forward and getting just at the right moment exactly what they need to be able to fulfill that potential that they have. And the homeschool market is looking for that kind of autonomy. They tend to be more pioneering of a bunch, and they're excited about things that give their students real world experiences and provide enrichment beyond what they would get in a traditional school setting or through the traditional reading, writing, arithmetic type of curriculum. And entrepreneurship education, I think, is an exciting place for this kind of innovation to happen, because having AI as your co-founder could be a really empowering way to launch your first business where you're still doing the work, the ideas are yours, but some of those challenging topics that might make you want to throw up your hands and say, I've had enough now. AI can be right there with just the right type of educational experience so that you can learn to grow into that challenge and become more resilient.
And we're still learning about the use cases of AI in education at NFTE. But one of the things that I've found really interesting and remarkable is just what you mentioned, how AI tools can be utilized to help students in the ideation process for their businesses, how AI tools can help students who might be English language learners level up their written content or even their spoken business pitches through the capabilities that different AI tools have. We certainly see in students' pitch decks more and more each year the idea that and the fact that they're using all sorts of AI applications with design and graphics to just make their pitch deck shine, as well as an increasing number of business ideas that themselves are grounded in AI. So a lot more businesses these days that Nifty students are proposing that propose a chatbot to, address some sort of social problem or to provide a convenience or a service, as well as many other uses. So it is going to be something that I think we'll see more and more, and I hope will find its way in a more formal way into established school systems and home schools and all of the different delivery methods. With that said, we know from the experience of the internet revolution and the personal computing revolution that brought forward gaps and divides, the digital divide. And many people talk about the prospect of an AI divide that is present. And I should say that I even see that myself in some of the venues in which Nifty does its work. We're trying to prevent those gaps by making sure our programs engage with AI and that students are encouraged to do that responsibly and within our parameters. What's your own view about how to prevent AI being just another thing that creates more gaps instead of narrowing them?
So I think you're exactly on the right path here, because organizations like Nifty, who have a mission to support students from underrepresented communities, leveraging AI tools in their platforms is one of the most important things I think that we can do to prevent that AI gap from starting in the first place. And that you are working with the students who would be susceptible to that gap. And so if Nifty sat back and did nothing about it, I think that that would really be an injustice in terms of creating an opportunity for that gap to widen. But because of your forward thinking, I think that's doing that first step in preventing the gap.
I'm certainly hoping that our look into homeschool and micro school populations will strengthen Nifty's historic commitment to underserved communities. And you know more than I do about these communities through your work and your work for us. But what I've learned is that many of the students who are in homeschool and micro school populations are there because they did not find the traditional school to be a hospitable environment for a lot of reasons, sometimes having to do with bullying and victimization in schools, sometimes having to do with special education needs or learning differences or different learning styles that were just not being met in their traditional school environments, and then other cultural reasons as well. But whatever the reasons, it's very clear that there is a population of students and parents out there who really are looking for equity in their own right, yeah, on their own terms, that traditional schooling, for whatever reason, isn't doing for them. So very much looking forward to building on this work that you've helped us get started. And we have what I hope will be a vibrant fall ahead as we begin to debut these programs in certain markets in which we serve. But let's shift gears and let's go back to the Lucas Center. So you are the founding executive director. First of all, just give us the landscape. What is the Lucas Center? Where is it? How many people does it serve? What is the basic mission? And then from there, talk a little bit to us about some of the big questions that you're working on.
The Lucas Center for Entrepreneurship is located on the coast of Georgia. So we operate just south of Savannah, but north of Jacksonville, Florida, and serve that region between Savannah and Jacksonville. There are about 7 counties there whose populations we serve, primarily rural communities. And we believe that entrepreneurship is a vehicle for economic empowerment. And so that's our mission, is to create those opportunities for economic empowerment through entrepreneurship education, mentoring, access to resources, capital, and kind of breaking open the ecosystem for entrepreneurs so that there's more access for everyone. We've served about 900 people in the last 900 entrepreneurs in the last 3 years. And that's only going to grow over the next few years as we expand our offerings into a manufacturing incubator space and a kitchen incubator. We're opening up an impact loan fund and just have a lot of exciting irons in the fire.
The fact that this work is centered on rural communities is really amazing. Of course, rural communities need entrepreneurship. Communities that aren't developed need economic development. And what is the way that you provide it? Through entrepreneurship. I always talk
Exactly.
to them about how I find it odd sometimes that people don't recognize fully the importance of entrepreneurship because go to any town, anywhere, urban, suburban, or rural, look around. What will you see? Businesses. And so entrepreneurship is the backbone of really society in many ways, along with other key institutions. It's great that you're able to do that work. The clients that you serve, the people that you serve, what are beyond obviously wanting to start a business? What are some of the specific things that they are really coming to you in the center for assistance with?
Yeah, I would say there are really two primary things. The first is I have an idea and I don't know where to start, and we help with that process. So you have an idea, you don't know where to start. We have programmatic solutions for that. And then we also work with entrepreneurs one on one through coaching and consulting. And all of the services are completely free of charge to our participants, and they're not limited by geographic boundaries. I just spoke to someone in Virginia actually recently who had an idea and didn't know where to start, and they had heard about the Lucas Center. And so while she couldn't attend any of our in person programs, we could have a conversation about helping her get started. The second is I have a business and I'm really good at barbecue. That's a big one around here, sewing or marketing or building websites or whatever it is, but I don't know much about business and that's holding me back from reaching my goals. I would say that's kind of the biggest second group that we support, our business owners, entrepreneurs who founded a business because they're really great at what they do and they just need some of those business fundamentals in operations, marketing, financials, what have you, to be able to take their business to the next level. So, again, programmatic support for that, but also do coaching and consulting.
Sounds like a lot of the things that we seek to do with younger learners at Nifty, you're seeking to do with somewhat
Yes.
older people at the Lucas Center. And out of
Yeah.
curiosity, what is the backstory of Mr. Lucas, the patron of the center?
Art Lucas is an entrepreneur. He founded the Lucas Group, which is a large recruiting agency that operates in 16 cities around the world. He started the business in the 70s to be able to find placement for officers who were coming out of the military in corporations. And he thought that the training that they had received through the military really well equipped them to be leaders in corporate America. And he was right. So that was his mission.
Do you see yourself in the work of the center as also kind of being situated in this larger societal discourse that we're in right now where people are looking beyond traditional school and like a business program or an MBA? I mean, from what we do at Nifty and I think from what you do, we're both sending the message that sure, those types of traditional programs are great and can be very, very beneficial, but there's a lot you can do with alternative structures. How do you see it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think in today's world in particular, we've gotten accustomed to this just in time learning. This is the thing that I'm doing right now, and I need to figure out how to do it. What is the resource that I can tap into that will help get me there? Which is quite different from, getting an undergraduate degree in economics, and maybe you don't need that information for another 20 years when you're a manager in a company. It's just a different model. But because of this instantaneous access to content, to learning opportunities, I think Nifty and the Lucas Center are both positioned to be able to deliver that for people.
Last question before we wrap up here. If you could go back to your earlier self who was just trying to start a business and you could give your earlier self advice on key things that you wish you knew and that now you know, or that you've learned through your experience in your doctoral research or through the center or your work with us at Nifty, what are a couple of those key things?
Two things. One would be, don't fall prey to the ostrich effect. It's really easy sometimes for us to think that things will sort themselves out. It's a protective mechanism that humans have to avoid having to deal with things that are really unpleasant. And I had a number of experiences as the CEO of my company in the early years where there were some challenging situations that if I had dealt with them earlier and not just stuck my head in the sand and ignored them, hoping that they would sort themselves out, things would have been a lot more challenging initially, but would have turned out a lot better in the end. So I would say that's one. And that's probably one that I see entrepreneurs struggle with more than any other, is the ostrich effect. And the second I would say is about capital. I really believed that my tiny, tiny amount of resources were plenty, that I could figure it out. And I did. I didn't take out outside capital for 14 years into my entrepreneurial journey. I grew those three schools really from that original $109. And when I did take out capital for the first time, it was pretty much because it was there. And I should have asked a lot more questions about what the funder was looking for as a part of the capital. And sometimes it's when you see the potential that you can bring to life when money comes your way as a business owner, it's easy to just say, yes, like I'm going to jump on this. This is great, without asking some tough questions about what the funder is looking to get in return. And I would have loved to have that advice as a younger entrepreneur. Not all capital is good capital.
That's really important. And honestly, that's a point that you don't hear all that often. There's such a focus among founders on securing capital is the most important thing. And even as a marker of success, like if you're getting
Right.
capital, then you must be on the right track. So it's really interesting to hear a different message based on your experience directly and through all the work that you've done. Very last question, because we
Mhm.
do a lot of work, as you know, in the Southeast. There
Yes.
are going to be some viewers and listeners who will want to find you and learn more about the Lucas Center. So, if they are among those people, how can they get in touch with you and find you and the work that you're doing at the Lucas Center?
So our website is easy to find, lucascenter.com. And my email address is ande@lucascenter.com. So ANDE. And happy to connect with anyone. Some of the work that we've been doing with Nifty is related to building mentoring training programs. And I think we've talked a lot about entrepreneurs in our discussion today, but the mentoring side of that is just as important, because having mentors to help guide the process, and instead of having to look back to the 20-year younger self and give advice, having someone in the moment that you need it, has that advice in the moment you need it, is really important. And so if there are mentors or people looking to start mentoring programs, that's something I'd love to discuss too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for all the work that you do and your partnership with us at Nifty, and for sharing your bold vision and your insights on where education is headed next. As inspired as I am, I encourage you to follow the work of the Lucas Center and Ande and check out our new enterprise and AI powered programs at Nifty, debuting over the summer and into the fall. And if you're part of the homeschool or micro school community, we're going to have some offerings for you as well. As always, stay connected with Nifty at nifty.com. That's NFTE.com. And join us next time for more conversations at the intersection of education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Thanks for being with us. Ande, thanks a lot.
Entre News is a production of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. For more information, visit nfte.com.